Hi. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. I'm Christine Parthamore. I'm the CEO of the Council on Strategic Risks, and we're thrilled to have so many of you here today. I'd like to welcome, to kick things off with introductory remarks, the chair of our board, the Honorable Sherry Goodman.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's really a pleasure to launch this first of quarterly Fireside Chats that the Council on Strategic Risks will host, focusing on weapons of mass destruction issues. For those of you who are new to the Council on Strategic Risks, we are a bipartisan, nonprofit security policy institute devoted to anticipating, analyzing, and addressing core systemic risks to security in the 21st century. And I'm Sherry Goodman. I'm chair of the board. I also serve as vice chair of the Secretary of State's International Security Advisory Board, among other roles. We have some of our board members here. Deb Gordon, I'd like to recognize her. And we also have the executive secretary of the ISAB here, Michelle Dover, and many others of you from state, NSC, defense. I want to thank you all, and from other walks. I see a number for DC Health. I want to thank you all. I'm excited for today's event. I want to personally commend everyone here, speakers and audience members, who contributed to a major milestone for the United States and the world when on July 7th, the team at Bluegrass Army Depot in Kentucky destroyed the last weapon in the legacy U.S. chemical weapons stockpile. Let's get around. This fulfilled a longtime pledge when the nation joined the Chemical Weapons Convention and marks many years of hard work to accomplish this safely. I should just have to add my own personal note, because in the 1990s, when I served as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security, I was intimately involved in the environmental permitting associated with the chemical weapons destruction plants, particularly in Twelly, Army Depot in Utah, Pueblo in Colorado. I've been to the facility at Johnston Atoll. I took the EPA Region 9 administrator out there so she could see it herself. And there were a number of other locations. I worked very closely with the Army team that was managing that in the U.S. And it was not an easy lift, let us say. So it's, this year marks a tremendous moment in history. Unfortunately, the threat of state and non-state actors possessing or using chemical weapons remains with us. And as we have so many deadly conflicts around the world today, we see this vividly in the uses of chemical weapons that have occurred since the convention entered into force. So as such, today's event will focus in part on continuing chemical weapons challenges. The evolving landscape is troubling. There are many drivers at hand, some of which we will no doubt explore today. Yet our aim for CSR is to ensure we are contributing to solutions. Today's conversation will be the first of what we hope are many discussions about how best to strengthen the implementation of the Chemical Weapons Convention, including preventing the reemergence of chemical weapons programs, preventing non-state actors from acquiring and weaponizing dangerous chemicals, ensuring information integrity in an era of increasingly dangerous disinformation surrounding chemical weapons, and the challenges presented by technological advances. So we are joined by three extraordinary leaders today, and let me briefly introduce them to you, although probably most of you already know them. So our first panelist is Pranay Vadi, who serves as the Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Arms Control, Disarmament, and Nonproliferation at the National Security Council. Prior to this role, Mr. Vadi served as the Senior Advisor in the Bureau of Arms Control Verification and Compliance at the State Department, as well as numerous previous roles at the State Department focused on strategic stability and deterrence. Hey, and I don't believe that the longer your title, the less important your job is, so.
You guys cut the bio down.
Yeah, okay. You've also held a number of other roles, and I've seen you brief at the ISAB, done an excellent job, and we've all learned so much from you, so thank you. We are also joined by the Honorable Deborah Rosenblum, who currently serves as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chem-Bio, Defense Programs, and is the Principal Advisor to the Secretary, Deputy Secretary, and Undersecretary. You've got a lot of bosses there. And as we say, you know, as Admiral Rickover liked to say, the more bosses I have, the fewer I really have. So we know with her yeah, there we go. But they trust in her, so I know that. With her vast experience, expertise, and leadership in understanding chem, bio, nuclear, and other national security threats, we're very fortunate to have her. And I do remember your predecessor, many times removed, who was then called the ATSD, Atomic Energy, because that used to, and I just remember the Secretary of Defense, who was then Bill Perry, would just say, okay, Hal, you got that? Okay, you got that. So I'm sure they say that to you as well. Our final panelist today is Mr. Mark Shaw, who serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Arms Control. Wait, didn't we just change some names? Okay, do you want to give us, like, am I saying it right?
It's now the Bureau of Arms Control, Deterrence, and Stability.
There we go. Okay, we'll have to rewrite this because I'll forget it in a sec. Okay, he previously served as the Deputy Executive Secretary in the Department's Executive Secretariat. He's got more than 20 years in the Foreign Service and has also served in leadership positions as Director of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement and in a number of embassies around the world. So we're very happy to have him here today. We hope today's event contributes to a deeper understanding of how chemical weapons threats are evolving and helps to drive action in mitigating them. We could not have three better leaders to further this cause. And then I also want to give a real shout out to our CEO, Christine Parthmore, who makes all of this happen at the Council on Strategic Risks. She is really, truly an amazing, quiet, and humble, but outstanding leader, and I just want to give her my personal thanks.
So much, Sherry.
Over to you, Christine.
Thank you so much. So thanks again for everybody for being here and to our honored guests today for speaking. So we're going to kick it off with opening remarks from each of them at the podium, and then we'll get into some questions and answers, which I will kick off and start, and then open it up to audience members in case you have questions as well. So just as a reminder, today's event is being recorded, and it will be posted on the internet later in probably about a week or so. So it is an open session for public consumption. And again, thank you all for joining. So we'll start with Pranay.
Thank you, Christine, for the introduction, and Sherry as well, and to the team at CSR for hosting an incredibly important discussion. You're contributing expertise, both policy, technical, government, and non. You're most importantly contributing time and attention to an extremely important set of issues that sometimes get lost in the shuffle these days. And so I want to thank you for that. Our administration has been referring to 2023 as a big year for countering chemical weapons. I'm glad that today's event allows us to reflect on the strength of the Chemical Weapons Convention and the U.S. commitment to it. We all know the convention has faced real challenges during the past decade, and Sherry, you're right in saying that the chemical weapons threat landscape is still challenging us today, albeit in different ways than it may have decades ago. What you'll hear from us today is a story of how we're facing those challenges head on with our domestic and foreign partners. Not just for the sake of our own national security, but for the sake of future generations to have a chance to live in a world where chemical weapons are a thing of the past. This is a mission that's personal for President Biden, who fiercely advocated for the United States to join the Chemical Weapons Convention as a senator in 1997. I think many of you know how difficult it is to lead an arms control treaty process through the Senate, but then Senator Biden fought for the CWC because he knew it would foster a safer and more secure world. And he was right. Today that fight lives on. Our administration's approach to countering chemical weapons comes down to objectives in 4 key areas. First, in disarmament and nonproliferation policy, we're focused on eliminating chemical weapons programs and preventing new ones from emerging. Second, the United States is deterring chemical weapons use and holding actors accountable for using or supporting the use or development of these chemical weapons. Third, in our more traditional arms control policy, we are reinforcing the international prohibition against chemical weapons and strengthening international frameworks like the CWC. And fourth, in considering our homeland response and preparedness capacities, we are building capacities to mitigate the consequences of chemical threats at home and abroad. Assistant Secretary of Defense Rosenblum and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Shaw will provide examples of how we plan to advance those objectives from the defense and diplomatic perspectives. But let's not lose sight of the significance of what we've accomplished this year. The elimination of our chemical weapons stockpile marked the elimination of all declared chemical weapons stockpiles in the world and is one of the greatest disarmament stories of our generation. It is perfectly permissible to set aside our traditional cynicism on these issues to celebrate that fact. We're grateful to the countless Americans who gave their time and talents to this noble mission. From our decision makers here in Washington to the workforce at our stockpile sites across the country, to our diplomats in The Hague and everywhere in between. As you'll hear from this panel, all of us know that it is a critical time to use this momentum to tackle the challenges that remain. Chemical weapons have been used in a range of scenarios during the past decade, which means that we must continue to make clear that their use is never acceptable. That's why we are steadfast in our efforts to ensure Russia and Syria's violations of the CWC do not go unaddressed, and why we're closely monitoring the conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza today. We're also looking at how we can shore up our own efforts with allies and partners to account for modern threats that have emerged since the CWC entered into force. During the past 5 years, the United States has been proud to lead initiatives at the OPCW to establish a new attribution mechanism, strip Syria of certain rights and privileges, update the CWC's verification regime, clarify the treaty's stance on central nervous system acting chemicals, and keep a spotlight on adversaries' dangerous activities with the ultimate goal of showing that illicit behavior will be revealed and there will be costs for violating the CWC. And yes, this work takes time. Our adversaries are hoping that we will move on or forget these issues, but their hope is misplaced. Compared to other arms control treaties, the CWC has proven itself to be flexible and resilient, and a great deal of credit goes to the professionalism and expertise of the OPCW Technical Secretariat as well as the diplomats who support it. Even though almost every country in the world is party to the CWC, we must not lose sight of threats like North Korea, who isn't a CWC member and maintains up to several thousand metric tons of chemical warfare agents. We must also stay focused on Iranian and Chinese research of pharmaceutical-based agents and toxins that have utility for chemical warfare purposes. And there remains a persistent threat of non-state actors pursuing chemical weapons. This too is a priority for the President, who signed a new policy in March to combat all stages of WMD terrorism, from acquisition through use, to ensure that we're able to prevent, mitigate, and respond to any threats with our partners at home and abroad. Our long record of success with preventing and preparing against WMD terrorism gives us a roadmap to enhance our chemical security, preparedness, and response efforts for years to come. Let me close with this. We often frame this conversation around our vision of a world free of chemical weapons. That's the commitment that we made when we joined the CWC, and it's a commitment we must renew every day. I'm proud of our country's strong track record on this issue, and the world can be assured that our story is not over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll welcome Deborah Rosenblum. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Let me add my voice, Christine and Sherry, to thanks for including me, and it's an honor to join Pranay and Mark here to talk a little bit about what we're doing at the Department of Defense in support of U.S. policy on chemical weapons. The last time I was on a dais like this was just a few weeks ago. My colleague Kingston Reef and I, we were in Richmond, Kentucky, and I was there with Senator McConnell as well as Governor Beshear to really celebrate the workforce, because it goes without saying, and I'll talk a little bit about this, none of this would have been possible without American ingenuity and the American workforce. And we owe them a debt of gratitude doing very dangerous work. So join me in absence of thanking them. As Pranay just spoke, he outlined the administration's priorities in this vital and very important area. And as Sherry noted, we just recently accomplished a key administration priority, the destruction of over 3,000 tons of declared U.S. chemical agent contained in over 881,000 munitions that were located both in Kentucky as well as Colorado. What was driving us throughout in our work was the statement that the most important action that the United States can take to contribute to a world free of chemical weapons is and was to follow through on our own treaty commitments. And with a verifiable completion of destruction operations, we have done just that. Although this is an important, significant success, the U.S. experienced many bumps in the road on the way to meeting our treaty commitments. At many points, and Sherry alluded to this in talking about the decades that the United States has been in work on this, at many points along this road to completion, we had to address technical, legal, and regulatory challenges, incentivize systems contractors, reevaluate our acquisition strategy, and re-energize leadership. Let's also not forget that while several U.S. industries were shut down during the global pandemic, this program was ramping up. But as with most of history, there are many lessons to be learned in this experience. A critical lesson learned is the importance of collaboration and the importance of maintaining momentum. The July 7th milestone would not have been possible without the leadership and collaboration across the Department of Defense and across administrations, as well as the local communities at the stockpile sites, as well as our interagency and international partners, most particularly the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or OPCW. We also couldn't have done it without the Colorado and Kentucky workforces who remained committed to ushering this program's mission to success. Lastly, Congress provided the authorization and appropriations necessary to complete this imperative, especially Senator McConnell. He was and remains a stalwart of the chemical demilitarization program. He advocated for using an alternative destruction technology to incineration in support of his constituents' preferences and to ensure that the financial resources were provided to complete the mission by the congressionally mandated mandate of later this year. He also maintained transparent and open communication on the progress of the destruction operations in Kentucky to ensure that the local needs of the local community and population were met. So now what? Now that the destruction mission is over, our chemical demilitarization program will be focused on safely closing the destruction facilities in both Colorado and Kentucky. Looking to the future, we must also leverage the momentum from the completion of our stockpile destruction and learn from our past. The chemical weapons threat has not disappeared, and as we've talked about, it's done nothing but get worse. We're far from done, and we know that. As many of you know, the 2022 National Defense Strategy focused on 3 priority lines of effort: integrating deterrence for maximum effect, building enduring advantages, and campaigning to include our allies and partners. Actions the Department is taking in the chemical and biological weapons elimination mission space support all three of these objectives. We must improve our conventional forces' ability to operate in the face of limited nuclear, chemical, and biological attacks. We must have the capacity to destroy found or seized adversary chemical weapons. But the need for capabilities to support foreign destruction missions goes well beyond the battlefield. We must also be prepared for a diplomatic breakthrough involving one or more of the states that still possess large chemical weapons stockpiles, however remote that may seem to us in today's international security environment. The DoD's rapid success in developing the capabilities needed to destroy Syria's declared chemical weapons stockpile is misleading. The persistent and emerging CBW challenges are much more complex than the familiar bulk agents needing to be neutralized in 2014. And I say that with the utmost respect for those who were involved and led that operation. One of my top priorities is thus to ensure readiness to support the safe assessment and destruction of chemical and biological weapon threats, including from nation states. This requires that we make strategic investments to optimize our capabilities and readiness to act, regardless of the quantity, location, or the condition of the type of chemical weapon we may find. Our recent Don't Blow It industry competition we executed in collaboration with our UK partners, and I see Nick here from the embassy, is a great example of the kind of innovative approach we must pursue to build enduring advantage while maximizing the use of limited resources. This competition yielded man-portable and transportable solutions for defeating small quantities of bulk agents and munitions on the battlefield or in otherwise very austere environments. We have internally implemented processes that improve our investment strategy, limiting duplication of effort, and maximizing the utility of existing and planned solutions. These strategies have allowed us to effectively and efficiently close gaps in order to gain advantage. For example, some of the same technologies that we might use on the battlefield could be permitted for domestic use to destroy recovered chemical warfare materials. Conversely, we are seeking to buy down risks to be prepared for any upcoming large-scale foreign destruction by leveraging technologies we have already used in the destruction of our domestic stockpile. But our work is far from over. We need better and more flexible options to destroy foreign chemical weapons threats. As we work to maintain and augment our own readiness to destroy chemical weapons, the Department of Defense will not cease in its efforts to support effective implementation of the Chemical Weapons Convention, including working with the OPCW to ensure our readiness to face current and future chemical weapons threats. The Department will continue to leverage current collaborations through the DoD Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, or CTR. Through this program, we have provided direct support to OPCW's new Center for Chemistry and Technology, a state-of-the-art training and laboratory facility built to enable chemical analysis and forensics, as well as to support related training requirements. The threat posed by chemical weapons has not disappeared and is more daunting now than it has ever been, particularly with the blatant disregard for long-standing international norms against the use and emergence and convergence of technologies that make the development of these weapons easier and more cost-effective. The Department of Defense will celebrate our recent success, but we will only do so in knowing that we cannot cease in our efforts to support the effective implementation of and total compliance with the Chemical Weapons Convention, both by working unilaterally but also alongside our international partners to ensure readiness for any future chemical weapons threat. Thank you again, and I look forward to answering your questions during the Q&A.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Mark for opening remarks.
So, good afternoon. I am delighted to be here today with all of you and with my colleagues from the NSC and DoD. It is not often that we get to stop and take stock and, at least on some level, reflect on our accomplishments. The destruction of our chemical weapons stockpile is indeed one of them. But there are many more. Many of those victories are less visible, but equally consequential as we move toward a world that is free of chemical weapons. So thank you to CSR for providing this platform for us to engage with you all on such an important matter. As mentioned, I serve as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the State Department's newly renamed Bureau of Arms Control, Deterrence, and Stability. In that capacity, I oversee our Office of Chemical and Biological Weapons Affairs, and together we work with our team at the U.S. mission to the OPCW to advance our foreign policy in this area. And so that's where I'd like to focus my remarks on: the policy accomplishments the U.S. government has achieved in advancing the implementation of the Chemical Weapons Convention, and through that frame, I'd like to identify and discuss future challenges. As a starting point, I want to reiterate our unwavering commitment to the CWC, which has proven to be an excellent tool for maintaining international security. It is through the OPCW, with its long history of impartiality, transparency, and professionalism, that we have the platform to work bilaterally and multilaterally to deter CW use and to hold to account those who violate the convention. The majority of the over 190 states parties to the convention take seriously their commitments. But to know who does not, one needn't look further than the State Department's annual report to Congress on states parties' compliance with the CWC, the Condition 10C, colloquially known as the 10C report. I will reference two of those countries today, Russia and Syria, arguably the two most egregious violators of the convention, and the ways in which they have disregarded their international obligations and what we, working in collaboration with our partners and allies, have done to hold them to account. Russia's transgressions are well documented. Russia used chemical weapons in 2018 in its assassination attempts on Sergei and Yulia Skripal, and again in 2020 on Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. We have also seen multiple reports that Russia has used riot control agents on the battlefield in Ukraine. Further, in 2018, Russia's operatives were caught by Dutch authorities attempting to hack the OPCW's computer systems. Russia also failed to provide complete declarations to the OPCW of its production and development facilities and its CW stockpile. We believe the Russian Federation maintains an active, offensive CW development program. All of these, of course, are expressly prohibited by the convention. And beyond its own non-compliance, Russia has also actively obstructed efforts at the OPCW and elsewhere to account for its multiple uses of chemical weapons. We, our partners, and our allies have proactively addressed Russia's malign behavior. For example, the United States, Canada, and the Netherlands successfully led the effort to submit a technical change proposal to add 2 families of Novichoks, the type of chemicals used against the Skripals, to the convention's schedule of chemicals. OPCW states parties ultimately adopted this proposal in 2019 by consensus. This was the first time such an action was taken since the CWC entered into force in 1997. The impact of the addition of Novichoks has been significant. It means the convention, through its declaration and verification mechanisms, now has the tools to apply greater controls on and scrutiny of these chemicals. In response to Russia's use of CW against the Skripals and Navalny, the United States expelled 60 intelligence officers, imposed financial and export sanctions under the CBW Act, imposed national level restrictions on purchases of Russian sovereign debt and other measures. In 2019, out of concern, Russia and other states' parties were pursuing fentanyl and other chemicals that act on the central nervous system for offensive purposes. And nearly 2 decades after Russia used a fentanyl chemical mixture in the Dubrovka theater siege that claimed the lives of 129 hostages, we successfully led an effort in 2021 that memorialized the understanding that the aerosolized use of central nervous system acting chemicals is not a legitimate law enforcement purpose. This had been a priority across 4 administrations. The Assad regime in Syria also has a legacy of violating its obligations under the convention. We assess that after acceding to the Chemical Weapons Convention in 2013, the Syrian regime hid undeclared CW and used sarin and chlorine to conduct CW attacks against the Syrian people. Based on the United States conservative assessment, the Assad regime has used chemical weapons at least 50 times since joining the convention. We believe Syria still maintains a chemical weapons capability. Together with the international community, we have responded forcefully against Syria to uphold the global norm against chemical weapons use and maintain the core pillars of this convention. In 2021, OPCW states parties condemned Syria's use of chemical weapons and suspended its rights and privileges under the convention, including its right to vote and its right to hold any office in the organization. Over the years, the United States also imposed sanctions against more than 300 individuals and entities associated with the Syria CW program. And the U.S. government has taken military action twice. After the 2017 sarin attack on Khan Sheikhoun and following the 2018 chlorine attack on Duma. Such actions indicate our willingness to use all tools at our disposal to respond to CW use. Those are just some of the examples of the work we have done to deter and hold accountable those who violate the convention. Unfortunately, we know our work is never done. As a recent example, and as I mentioned before, there are open source reports of the use of riot control agents by the Russian Federation against Ukrainian armed forces that should concern everyone. The CWC prohibits the use of riot control agents as a method of warfare, and we continue to watch closely and make clear our serious concerns about these reports. As we move into the second quarter century of the CWC, we are reminded that CW and CW use are unfortunately not relics of the past, and that many issues remain to this day. The use of chemical weapons in the 21st century persists, both with crude materials and sophisticated laboratory-produced agents. Emerging threats come from novel agents like Novichok's and their derivatives, AI, assisted creation of toxic chemicals, and state actors with a variety of chemical-capable munitions and a demonstrated willingness to use them in conflict. And let us not forget about the threat posed by non-state actors. Beyond Russia and Syria, we remain cognizant of the danger in this age of asymmetric warfare that the use of chemical weapons could become more widespread by bad actors as they seek to gain tactical advantage. In spite of these challenges, we remain confident in our ability to be able to adequately address these threats because of the convention's enduring ability to adapt to changing circumstances. We, as a government, in the same whole-of-government manner we tackled the effort to destroy our chemical weapons stockpile, are working hand in glove to strengthen our ability to lessen the likelihood that we will be forced to confront any chemical weapons attack. As we speak, my team and I are working diligently in advance of this year's annual Conference of States Parties, which oversees implementation of the convention. We are already taking steps to uphold the integrity of the convention. The United States and several like-minded nations are proposing a draft decision at this year's CSP to take additional steps to address the Syrian chemical weapons threat. The draft calls for capacity building for states parties to address the threat from non-state actors, greater transparency for the transfer of scheduled chemicals, and it recommends that states parties take collective measures, including to prevent the transfer of dual-use chemicals and equipment to Syria. Moreover, we are providing support to NGOs and the like, whose members are working to document abuses by despot regimes. Separately, we will continue to work to implement an October 2017 OPCW Executive Council decision to assist and protect states parties against the threat or use of CW by non-state actors. We will continue to encourage states parties to adopt comprehensive penal legislation at the national level to protect against the use of CW, as well as to improve capacity building and combating the development, acquisition, and use of chemical weapons by non-state actors. The recently opened ChemTech Center for Chemistry and Technology will allow the OPCW to become more proficient in its analytical techniques, so we can apply more intricate analysis methods to resolve and trace CW use. The center will also improve national laboratory capabilities and grow the capacity of states parties to counter chemical weapons threats. In recognition of the fact that the work of the OPCW has evolved since 1997, we must ensure the OPCW Technical Secretariat continues to be equipped to provide robust assistance to states parties faced with the threat and use of chemical weapons. This includes knowledge management and building on expertise gained from investigative work. We need to build capacity in areas related to biotoxin testing and enhancing lab capabilities. The United States is leading in this effort. For example, we recently supported the allocation of $250,000 of funds previously provided by the United States to the OPCW to assist Ukraine in the event of the use or threat of use of chemical weapons. That $250,000 was provided on top of the millions of dollars in CBRN bilateral security assistance we have provided to Ukraine for protective and detection equipment and response countermeasures. Lastly, the OPCW must undertake a concerted effort to encourage the remaining non-states parties to join. In conclusion, I needn't reiterate that the dangers posed in the 21st century by chemical weapons are immense. Unfortunately, we can still imagine a world where CW becomes the weapon of choice for state or non-state actors, and we can't let that happen. We remain serious about the scourge of CW and the dangers they pose, and we will continue to use all tools within our power to mitigate and eliminate this threat. Thank you again to CSR for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much for each of you for framing today's event with all your remarks, and again for all the work that your teams are doing and that you are helping to lead that you've described here. So I will kick it off with just a couple of questions first and then turn it to the audience. So in going off of Mark's remarks, I think tee up really well. One of our pressing questions is how the norms are holding up against weapons of mass destruction in general, chemical and biological weapons, and chemical weapons specifically. So we probably all wake up some mornings desperately afraid that the norm is weakening and what that could lead to, and thinking about what that could mean for the future. And some days there's a lot of cause for positivity, such as the adding of Novichok to some of the schedules of chemicals with the CWC, which showed the agility of the treaty as well. So how do we take all of this in terms of understanding, is the norm really holding, and can we count on that as we keep trying to build on it in the coming years? So for all these questions, anyone who would like to start, feel free to open up, and then anyone who'd like to comment is free as well.
Okay, that worked. So I think it's a great question, and I think those of us in this room probably spend more sleepless nights thinking about these issues than literally anybody who's outside of this room. So I think we have to keep that in mind. And as Mark and I were talking about before the panel began, I think we really appreciate the opportunity to come talk to this group and talk in general more about how we've been thinking about these issues, thinking about WMD norms generally. I think it's worth thinking about the 2019 schedule change as sort of like one sort of critical example of where we see evidence that the norm against CW is still very strong. That schedule change highlighted, I think, two important strengths of the CWC. One, its adaptability, as I think we all referenced, to sort of modern or emerging CW threats. Two, the fact that the 2019 agreement to add Novichok to the schedules was adopted by consensus, even including Russia, is very important to show where all countries are as it relates to these issues. The norm is strong because whether a country is a potential perpetrator or has been an avid supporter of the CWC and counter-CW efforts globally, there is a feeling that they need to be with everybody else. And so that sort of model behavior that is at the heart of the norm is important, and we have to work very hard to preserve that. It's also important to think about the near universality of the CWC. As we are expecting, hopefully South Sudan will exceed sometime in the very near future, but the list of countries that are not in the CWC is very, very small compared to many WMD-related agreements that are supposed to have global reach. And I don't think that we should look at that small list of countries, particularly actors like Russia and Syria, as sort of indications that the norm is weak. These countries are by far the exception to the rule. I guess it's also worth noting that in terms of preserving the norm, it takes a really long time to develop a norm. The sort of first formal international measures designed to address chemical weapons use, started in the 19th century. And this, more than 100 years later, resulted in the Chemical Weapons Convention. That is a long, long time to face a threat that sort of evolves very rapidly, even in the last decade or two and in the coming decades. There's also a fair amount of endurance that's required to uphold the norm. For us, it takes an interagency team like this. It takes having an excellent ambassador in The Hague, and Joe Manso and his team. It is a daily effort to actually work in The Hague at the OPCW and in buttressing the CWC and calling out incidents where we see them as often as we can. And I think finally, when you see threats to the norm, reestablishing the norm takes a tenfold effort on top of that. And so I think in some of the efforts that Mark has highlighted, you've seen where the U.S. government has tried to act very quickly to hold countries accountable, to draw a lot of attention to threats to the norm, with the hope that other countries that are out there who may think of engaging in this type of activity will think twice about it. Maybe I'll pause there and see if my colleagues have more to add.
Can I add a two-finger on that?
I just started talking.
I started. Okay, great. Yeah.
You have to fail first.
Yeah, absolutely. So while I certainly agree with everything that Pranay has said, I think we need to look through a lot of this with a very sober look at the degree to which the norm is under assault. And it is, as you rightly point out, an everyday effort to ensure that it is not eroded and remains strong. That said, it is becoming increasingly more and more under stress with disinformation, the use of social media, and a huge variety of other tools that are out there being done and perverted every single day with regards to that. So while we may certainly take solace and confidence in the large number of countries that absolutely support the norm, join the United States in ensuring that it is as strong as we need it to be, those countries that are working to against it are powerful. They have a voice, and it is something where we over at the Department of Defense have to remain very vigilant about in the harsh reality that we have seen, and Mark did a nice job articulating places where it has been used in the past, and those are certainly not exceptions. And so I think it's, you know, a glass half empty, half full kind of situation.
I just add a couple of points to that, and I agree with both of my colleagues on this. And certainly the norms are under assault. We are working very closely with the OPCW every day, and so we see that play out. There are two components I think we need to focus on to ensure that those norms do remain strong, and that's the sort of human component and what we do every day within the organization with our allies and with our partners to counter a lot of the disinformation that's out there, that our adversaries put out there, to ensure that the OPCW can do its work. And that's sort of the core of diplomacy and diplomatic work, particularly in a multilateral organization. At the heart of it is influencing other nations to down along the right path. And so I would say there's that human sort of element that we work on every day. The other part to that is ensuring that the OPCW itself remains strong. And that's at the core of sort of everything that we do, involving the CWC and its implementation. And I would say sort of on balance, right? I mean, we do have those who are seeking to upend the norms, but on balance, we still have, north of, 75% or so of the countries that do work with us. And Pranay mentioned the Central Nervous System Acting Chemicals votes, and also the vote to remove, Syria's voting rights within the organization. These votes were like 87 to 15 and 85 to 15. So there's still a substantial delta between sort of those who are working toward to support the norms and those that are not. But other things that we could do within the organization is ensuring that in this time of fiscal austerity that the budgets are strong. And we're all struggling with these. I mean, we're struggling with this in our own government, but the OPCW's ability to implement and further these norms depends on its, sort of financial health. And so we're going back and forth with them right now in advance of the CSP on these budget issues. And so we think that the new Chemtech Center, for which I think DoD poured in like a third of the cost, tens of millions of dollars, to ensure that this Chemtech Center came online, which will help, lead to research and development and other things that will further strengthen norms, and educate various states parties who come through for training and whatnot. So in any case, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. If I could just add a two-finger on that. With your last comment with regards to the technology center, I think as we think about norms, we typically think about them within the context of our diplomacy, and that is an incredibly important area to do that. But in and of itself, it is not enough. And so investments that either the United States as well as in partnership with our allies and partners able to make into the tech base and the ability to understand what has happened in the event that there is use again, and so that it's clearly sending a message internationally that while absolutely we are going to be doing everything we can internationally to protect this norm, please know that you're not going to get away with this. And that has a very important reinforcing message. So it really is looking at all of the tools that we have to be able to bring to bear diplomacy, certainly strengthening the OPCW, but also reinforcing the science and tech base that is going to enable us to say, it's not going to happen again.
I thought of two other things to reinforce the excellent work, primarily by interagency colleagues, but we don't get to do this during IPCs, where the relationship...
No, quite the opposite.
Quite the opposite, indeed. So another important aspect of strengthening the norm is our own performance, U.S. performance of its obligations. And so in that realm, completing the destruction of our stockpile is incredibly important to the world, for them to see it, despite the fact that countries will continue to say that we have these weapons when we don't. And that's a fight on messaging that we have to take on. Being able to do that and do it in a transparent way was incredibly important, I think, to strengthening the norm. A second reason or aspect to strengthening the norm is something that Deb just touched on, which is international cooperation and assistance. Being able to demonstrate that there is some basic bargain where countries will realize the sort of societal benefits of safe chemistry, receive resources to improve their own capacities to combat chemical threats, to utilize the benefits of chemical industry safely is really important. And it's frankly something that is not talked about enough. But when you go to international events to talk about the CWC, that is something that developing countries really ask a lot about. And I'm happy to see that the United States continues to be a strong provider of that type of assistance, particularly to countries that really want to realize the benefits of being a part of the CWC, contribute to this norm, but really want to see what the peaceful benefits may be.
Great, thank you all so much. So in addition to keeping the norm strong against chemical weapons, we have to keep deterrence strong as well. And so obviously a huge theme in the recent years, updates in recent years in our national security and national defense strategies has been introducing the concept of integrated deterrence and speaking about how we're moving to a whole of government approach and all the tools of national power being brought to bear in deterring all sorts of threats against the nation. And so it's a good sign that we have your interagency group, we're representing integrated deterrence a little bit on stage here today. But just asking, wanted to ask specifically regarding chemical weapons issues, how's it going on the integrated deterrence front and moving to that model for our national security?
Just want to make a quick comment with regards to that, because I think you're absolutely referring to a term that is used in the 2022 National Defense Strategy, and that is kind of regardless of what the problem set is that the United States is facing and confronted, we need to take an integrated deterrence approach to that. And on the face of it, it means generally using all the tools that are there, not just within the Department of Defense, but within the U.S. interagency. And I think you've heard a good discussion of aspects of that earlier. With regards to specifically the Department of Defense, the piece that is critically important, in addition to what we completed in terms of the destruction of the U.S. offensive program, is to ensure that our joint warfighters have protection in the event that it were to be used on a battlefield. And that is something that I look at it as overseeing the capability development in this area, is that we are working as fast and as hard on it as we can, but need to do that in parallel with all of the other efforts to both deter our adversaries from using it, as well as making the cost to it extremely high. Because for all of you here who are in the capabilities development and tech world, it takes a while. And this is a threat that is changing. It's very diverse. And we are looking at the projection of threats that look different necessarily than what they have in the immediate past. And it takes time for us to catch up with that from a technology and protection capability. And why that is important, not only in terms of absolutely saving the lives of our joint warfighters and civilians who may get caught in the crossfire, is our ability to do that sends a strong deterrent message that you are not going to meet the goal that you think you're going to meet by using this on a battlefield. So let me turn it over to Pranay.
Yeah, I'll jump in right here. So I think that component of working together to ensure that our integrated deterrence is effective is really something that we depend on at the department. Of course, what we did, to working with DoD and other entities to destroy those chemical weapons was an example of that, and why we're here today ostensibly. But we also work with DoD now on some of those things to equip Ukraine. Some of the things that I mentioned, equip Ukraine with the outfits to be able to deter a chemical weapons attack. We work with them to on chain of custody issues regarding chemical weapons or alleged chemical weapons attacks in the field. We can only do that through DoD's help. We've mentioned the Chemtech Center and how we continue to work, use the Chemtech Center to really strengthen our ability to respond to CW. Other things that we're doing is we're working with the FBI, for example, to build capacity with other national governments. And so we get the FBI and then other national governments who have asked us for assistance. We coordinate on building capacity within their chemical forensics areas. We work with DOE, who has experience in labs to for instance, Lawrence Livermore is the lab that we use that does a lot of our chemical analysis and whatnot. And so we work with DOE through DOE with the lab, and we work with them to identify possibly other labs that could become OPCW designated. And so just lastly, I don't want to underestimate the important role of diplomacy, because I've spent 25 years of my life as a Foreign Service officer, and so mostly overseas. And so we can't take that element for granted because these relationships that we have with our partners and allies really matter, building them and maintaining them. So I'll stop there.
Just really quickly, in addition to some of the resilience and preparedness, both domestically, internationally, civilian and non, that Devin and Mark touched on that last point with Mark, I think we're trying to talk a lot more about CW issues, not just kind of publicly, but also in the context of kind of the overall threat picture we're seeing when we have dialogues with our close allies, particularly our extended deterrence allies, and be able to talk about CW issues in addition to nuclear issues or in addition to BW issues, and sort of bring all of this together more, because we're seeing a picture that does not look so great, largely based on a few actors in the world that we're all worried about. And so we want to talk to our allies about this issue in the context of those other issues as well, and make sure that our counterparts, whoever they may be, whether it's my colleagues in the Cabinet Office, for my UK friends, or Deb's colleagues in another treaty allies country, are sort of thinking about this in the same way we are, or at least are aware that we're thinking about it a certain way, and we'd really appreciate it if they started to think about it that way too.
Great. So we're making progress. That's great. Thanks. I have more questions that I can jump to, but we'll hit up the audience first. So, yes.
Leonore Tamero. First, thank you so much. And this is such a historic milestone. I just really want to thank you for your leadership on this, and thank Kingston and Andy's work on this when he was at DoD. It's really a historical accomplishment. And I think especially, as you were saying, in juxtaposing U.S. leadership in fulfilling its commitments, as we look at strategic competition and as we see Russia violating its commitments. And so very significant, and thank you for all you did on this. Two questions. One is, so I've been thinking more recently about potential norms for space and cyber, but I'd be really curious about your thoughts, given that the Chemical Weapons Convention, like Biological Weapons Convention, really relied on engaging industry very heavily on creating the norms. You know, how that model, how, you know, CWC could serve as a model, potentially, or a foundation as we think about, you know, legally binding constraints, or at least starting to create norms in new domains like space and cyber, where you have a lot of dual use capabilities. And my second question is following up a little bit on Christine's integrated deterrence question. Given that it looks like we're going to have to be able to increase our deterrence by demonstrating readiness to counter WMD, and with the counter WMD strategy that recently came out, there might be new threats, new requirements for readiness, but also considering new attack vectors. Shannon Green and I were talking about this just a few weeks ago when we both served on House Armed Services Committee. You know, the members were looking at China's potential involvement in exploiting the fentanyl crisis and potentially stoking, you know, supplies in that crisis. And so we're looking at new attack vectors with regard to WMD. And so just curious about how that's shaping the priorities for you. Thank you so much.
Sorry, we're negotiating. Well, I'm going to pick the easiest parts of the two questions, and then you guys can deal with the rest. No, thank you, Leonore, and want to appreciate your comments. They're sort of well-deserved, my colleagues here, for the work that they've done on the stockpile. In terms of industry partnership, I think this was obviously a critical issue, both during the negotiation of the CWC and continues to be now. Knowing that there is a certain amount of oversight that will touch the dollars and cents of private industry in nearly 200 countries, right? That's not a small deal, particularly in a legally binding arrangement. And so I have found that there is a surprising amount of attention paid to how CWC affects the sort of livelihood of chemical industry in these countries, and there is a very open two-way conversation, and frankly, countries come to The Hague and represent the views of their industry very well, in addition to sort of industry outreach and things like that of a more formal nature. And so I actually think there's a good story there in how the CWC has tried to maintain that balance between needing to really exercise oversight of what chemical industry is up to in CWC states, parties, countries, but also ensuring that the verification is not so onerous that, you know, industries don't want to participate, they don't want to report information, and governments have less insight into what is actually happening. So I think that there's obviously with space and cyber less of a formal structure that exists internationally, but knowing that there is close partnership between the U.S. government and private industry in both of those areas is an important sort of foundational step to thinking about what types of norms, informal understandings, risk reduction measures, and so on and so forth can be developed over time as that international conversation goes on.
Can I just add one thing to that particular question, or part of the question is, it's not just industry, and I think this is particularly true of cyber and space, but it is something that we need to continue to talk to the U.S. public and international publics about. And that has been part of, in our experience with the Chemical Weapons Convention, an understanding not just by industry, but also by the public about why there has to be constraints and why it's in everyone's collective interest to do so. And that is a conversation that we are not yet having in those domains that you've talked about, cyber and space. And I think that's something that we ultimately are going to need to do. in order to bring industry along with us, and knowing that there is support from the U.S. public to do so.
I guess on fentanyl, I think I know this has been a debate in Washington. It's been a debate internationally, but particularly in Capitol Hill. Stopping illicit fentanyl is obviously a priority for the president. Adding fentanyls to the CWC's schedule may not be a practical or an effective way to deal with the problem. I think the United States has extremely high legal standards for dealing with fentanyl. Fentanyl does have medical uses, which makes the CWC more impracticable for controlling it. But we want to do everything we can to ensure it is controlled internationally in the same way that we control it here domestically. So the reality is that simply kind of talking about it in the context of the CWC does not give you the kind of resilience, countermeasures, et cetera, needed to deal with the crisis. It is just sort of one angle on this much bigger problem.
All right, additional questions? Yep.
Hi, thank you all so much for your time today. Sir, you mentioned generative AI in your opening remarks, and I was curious if any of you could speak to your perspective on how the democratization of highly complex information from a chemical weapons standpoint challenges some of the effective ways that the U.S. can deter pursuit of chemical weapons. Thank you.
Okay, been voted off the island here. I think I would answer your question in two ways. One is where we started this conversation, which is one of optimism. So while we are very concerned about the potential misuse of AI, machine learning, and those areas, and this is not unique to the chemical weapons area, but it also holds a great deal of potential for us in combating it. And in fact, at the Department of Defense, we are absolutely using machine learning and AI to better understand, and taking a lesson from, even though my references to biologic, it's still there with the chemical side from COVID, where it was instrumental in terms of cutting down time and ability to understand the nature of the threat and countermeasures that would be effective against it. So, I think that it is absolutely continuing to understand, and I know Pranay is probably going to want to add, given the Vice President's initiatives with regards to AI and the UK. But, it is very much of a double-edged sword. I think it's not, though, when we think about it just from an AI potential, when we think about the technology, it's also the disinformation that's associated with that, and using other forms of technology to continue to promulgate that. And it is incredibly concerning. And my colleague who heads up the Defense Threat Reduction Agency has established a new information resilience unit there, because we have found that in all of the programs, regardless of what's being done, it is continuously under assault. And if we don't take that into consideration and counter it, we are going to be losing and behind with regards to that.
Okay, we're all noted generative AI experts up here, so. But I'll take up where Deb left off. I think the important way in which we've been thinking about AI in the WD community is sort of the speed of relevance has really changed. And if AI and machine learning can really speed up the way in which a country or an actor can think of the necessary sort of alternative pathways to chemicals that are dangerous, hopefully it can do the same on the defense and response side as well. But if AI and machine learning are making everything faster, governments are not always so fast. International institutions are not always so fast. So I think we're going to see an emphasis on how are we able to utilize the promise of AI in our own jobs here in the interagency in response to a threat environment that may change rapidly, while still looking to uphold the sort of more general norm against CW and chemical threats. As it relates to the U.S. government, obviously, there's been a lot of discussion of AI in the news. The Vice President's speech in the UK, the release of an executive order. Our emphasis, and a lot of this is through partnership with industry to better understand this fast-moving space, has been on developing kind of responsible rules of the road as it relates to the use of AI. And I won't sort of read through the 150-page executive order for anybody here today, but I do encourage people to look at it. There are sections in there that are really relevant to our work in the WMD space that might be of interest, and really kind of explain how the administration is trying to keep pace with this problem, if not get ahead of it.
So this is a good question. Obviously, this is sort of what everybody is talking about these days. And within the OPCW, we are sort of just kind of stepping into this AI fora, if you will. We have relied for decades on sort of traditional scientific methods of within the technical secretariat and in our labs, the various labs around the world, to identify sort of chemical weapons, attribute them, and those sorts of things. And through those methods, also sort of that feed into sort of norms that the Chemical Weapons Convention develops. And also through that sort of research, scientists are able to determine, okay, so what's the next chemical threat? Is this part of a family that's already part of the convention, or do we need to, add another sort of chemical or chemical family to the annex on chemicals? And so we can kind of follow that, nowadays. But with AI, we know that there's both positive benefits that Pranay outlines, but also on the other end, there could be negatives associated with AI in this space, because AI, the danger is in that predictive capacity, or predictive ability of AI to sort of to go where we don't know, to a place that we don't know. And so, for example, if you think about the development of a biotoxin, for example, where does that go? And then for us, how do you establish a regime that responds to sort of that? And, can you establish something to respond to it quickly enough? I mean, so there's all these questions around AI that the OPCW and the states parties are continuing to kind of grapple with and try to figure out how to address.
Thank you all. I think we have time for at least one more question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Matthias Hammer. I'm with Time Magazine. First of all, thank you all for being here, and to CSR for putting on this great event. I just wanted to ask a little bit. You've all alluded to Syria and Russia being kind of key culprits now as far as developing CWs, or in some case using CWs. I'm wondering what kind of contact, what kind of means the administration is using to try to bring them either back to the table or to bring them, into following their CW commitments, and especially perhaps in light of some very vocal and public moves in the nuclear space from, say, Jake Sullivan at the NSC and Jill Ruby from the NNSA to try to bring Russia back to the table on nuclear issues and try to kind of separate that from other rising tensions with this rival. I'm wondering if there are kind of similar efforts going on in the CW space.
So without going into too much detail of what happens behind the scenes, the President, the Secretary of State, and the National Security Advisor have all been very clear that they're willing to discuss critical arms control issues with Russia, and that's inclusive of nuclear chem bio. We've made it very clear in the OPCW and other fora that we will want to continue to pursue these types of issues, especially issues related to Russia's compliance with the convention, in a conversation with them. To date, we have not seen interest from Russia in resuming that conversation with us, but we are here. We're ready to talk if they would like to talk to us. And I think from our perspective, we're going to continue, whether it's diplomatically or publicly, to communicate our desire to talk about these issues once again.
Okay. Is there one more question? Yes.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity and the discussion. So Steve Bland, I'm a CBRA medic. I'm an emergency physician, so I'm paid to be pessimistic. What keeps you awake at night, and do you think that will change between, as it's a strategic risk organisation, between now and say the next 10, 20 years, and is it chemical or one of the siblings?
I can start. But I guess I have two answers. One, by the time I go to bed, there's very little that will keep me awake. So that's my first answer, and it's not really a dodge. I guess another answer is usually it's when one of my kids are sick and like storms into the bedroom, but that's another problem. I honestly, the one thing that really kind of animates me at work, and this is maybe a different way of answering your question, particularly early in the morning when I'm trying to think about what I'm supposed to do that day, or, oh crap, I need to do something I didn't do last night. I really worry about these issues sort of falling to the back burner because other issues are sort of more attractive day to day, whatever crisis may be happening in the world, whatever crisis may be happening in Washington. And I want people to understand that when the world seems like it's in a more tense state, where there are more global crises in the world, generally speaking, that also means that there are tensions in the weapons of mass destruction space. There are potential crises in the weapons of mass destruction space, or the actors involved in the global crises, maybe actors who also have weapons of mass destruction. And so I don't want people to lose track of the fact that WMD issues are sort of behind the scenes on everything that is happening in the world that you read about in the news. And I always worry, and those of you who have had the benefit of experience of working in the US government at a time when these issues were really front and center, whether it was at the end of the Cold War or during the sort of peace dividend that was won in the immediate aftermath of the Cold War during the CTR days. I want to make sure that the people who follow me in my position in the government in the next generation are that much more prepared to focus on these issues and make sure that it stays in the public imagination as well.
I think what I would add to that is that, and we talked a little bit about it, but when we look at the convergences that are happening with science and technology, and we have a very different landscape in terms of the nature of threats in the WMD space, and particularly the chem and the bio, that we will have the capacity, along with our allies and partners, to stay ahead of it. And as we talked a little bit about, or I talked a little bit about earlier, it takes time to be able to develop the protections, to be able to develop countermeasures, to be able to protect civilians and military in the event that that were to become necessary. And so we're really banking on that whole of government approach that we're taking, and Mark talked about it, whether it be the FBI with its forensics capacity, whether it's diplomacy, whether it's all the different things that we can proactively do to slow things down so that we are in a much better position to feel that we have a certain level of capabilities to be able to deal with something we all hope never keeps us up at night in terms of that piece of it. And it's a very challenging, route ahead over the next 10 to 15 years, which is how the department has been talking about our near-peer competitions and all of the state actors, non-state actors that Mark went into with regards to all of those pieces. That threat environment is evolving, and it's evolving faster than we're necessarily keeping up with.
So I would say that there's not, and I don't want to sound naive, but there isn't much that keeps me awake at night, not just because I'm totally exhausted, like Pranay mentioned, but also because we work in this space daily, and we know how the mechanisms that are in place to be able to respond. We know that we have the mechanisms in place as a government working collaboratively to be able to respond to the sort of emergent threats that face us today. And so I'm confident in that. That said, I would say that when when the Russians sort of further invaded Ukraine, and then there was the rhetoric about using nuclear. The concern I had was that space between conventional and nuclear was chemical. And, there could become a scenario where that is used and that does proliferate and that does become the weapon of choice. And so at that time, I was a little bit sort of, the hair on the back of my neck standing up about what's going to happen over these course of the 3, 4, 5, 6 months. But I guess that's it.
Thank you all. And appreciate the question. I also sleep at night largely, though, because of all of you. So if you think about, just to close on a more positive note, again, the threats are severe and drive everybody here to work on these issues. But the talent level and dedication of so many of you in the room who work on these issues and of our guests tonight, I'm sure helps everybody who pays attention to these issues rest a little easier. So we'll do our part to keep up the focus and to help make sure this does not go to the back burner where it never should have been and never should be going forward from CSR's perspective. While I give thanks to the staff, we'll have just a few quick closing remarks from Andy Weber, Senior Fellow at CSR, if you want to go ahead and head up, and former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Programs. So we have 2 of them on the stage, a former and a current. And in advance, though, before Andy kicks it off, if you can all help me thank quickly our team who put this event together, Lillian Parr, Shannon Green, John Moulton, Jackson DuPont, and Dan Regan. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody who's here today, and anybody beyond those who are in the room today. If you could help me give a round of applause to our team. And again, I'm so grateful to our guests and everybody here. And with that, over to Andy to leave us inspired before we go on our ways for the night.
It's amazing how much progress we've made, and to celebrate the destruction of the U.S. stockpile is just fantastic. And the workers, thanks for recognizing the workers. I understand that there is a bar upstairs. If some want to continue the discussion, although it'll be a cash bar. I'm not offering to buy everybody drinks. So to leave on an optimistic note, the truth is that about 190 countries are not pursuing chemical weapons. And so we need to keep the pressure on those bad countries, those pariah states. We've talked about them today. There are only less than 5 of them. But in the 21st century, it's unacceptable for any nation to develop or use chemical weapons. And we've seen 3 countries use chemical weapons in this century. And so we need to keep the pressure on. And I agree with Christine. I sleep soundly at night knowing that the quality of the people that we have who are working on these problems, 14, 16 hours a day. So thank you for what you do to keep us safe.